Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. My name is Brian. Today, we are taking a look at a very special release. Now, Jack Daniel's has been on a tear for years. You all know that from the Coy Hill, the twice barreled, even just the barrel strength ryes. People have been kind of having this as one of their go-to pours on the shelf. You all might know I don't necessarily share that same experience, but I think it's true to say that with their limited drops that they've been doing, they've been on a tear. They've been creating some of the products that have whiskey enthusiasts hype. Today, we are taking a look at the newest one of those that happens to be the Tanyard Hill Rye. Now, this is a hazmat rye following in the footsteps of the Coy Hill bourbon that we saw before that. This is southwest of Coy Hill, so it's sitting up on this hilltop. It goes into this press release, talks about all these things that aid in the effect of flavor. If you're into whiskey, if you're watching YouTube, things like this, you all know these types of things already, so I won't get into it. What we do know about this is it follows the same standard Jack Daniel's mash bill: 70% rye, 18% corn, 12% malted barley. I think it does go through a little bit of a different process than Lincoln County process. You can find all that information if you just want to do some digging. Let's dive mainly into the tasting notes for this. This is an interesting product because a lot of people have been talking about it. They've been hyping this up. I was able just to taste a little bit of a sample, and that's why I want to dive into here. But what I want to do with the sample also is say, because of the high prices that this thing is commanding on the secondary, and also the low price that it's commanding on retail, where does it sit in the middle? And are there some alternatives that somebody might be able to go to if they're not able to find this Tanyard Rye? While I have you here, though, jump down below, give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Help me continue to grow the channel as we close out 2025 and move into 2026. You all know that I've been a little bit quiet as we get down towards the end of the year. However, I always like to try and do my due diligence, get through some of these more allocated products and really trying to weigh these out for that particular category on my list. Again, for those who don't know here on the channel, though, I work for Sealbox. I taste a lot of whiskeys all throughout the year, and so I have a bunch of different categories of how I break things down. So I'm kind of curious to see, one, how does this compare to other ryes I've tried on the market? And then two, just how does it compare as a rare and allocated release? Now, the sample I am tasting is 145.9 proof. I think these have a lot of variants that go down in the 130s and upwards a little bit higher of that 145 proof. But from prior tastings, I will say I am curious to see if people who get lower proof bottles of this might have a better experience. But let's go ahead and dive into the nose already. Right off the bat, I will say this is probably best enjoyed if you let it sit in the glass for a little bit, or you open your bottle a little bit and let it kind of air out. And I say that because right away on the nose, you get these really intense kind of torch sugar notes. They kind of lean into what I consider like a torched rubber type note. And I say that not as a displeasing note necessarily. It just really ramped up. You notice this, I think, sometimes in these dark, molassesy, really intense rums sometimes. I think you notice these notes on the Coy Hills. And I think that this is a note that you notice probably most prevalently in the 2018 King of Kentucky's. So it's not a note that's unfamiliar to Jack Daniel's or Brown-Forman at all. It's just a very intense cooked sugar, reduced sugar, and I mean reduced. This nose is powerful and thick right away. But again, if you give it some time in the glass, it does start to soften a little bit. And it moves into these really dark, heavy, fudgy notes. As it softens a little bit more, again, you get those rich fudge notes. Some fruit comes in as well. There's like some reduced kind of strawberry preserve like sweetness in there as well. But then there's little nips of ginger. So maybe like candied ginger, but it's not that stinging. I feel like you can tell that it's a rye. I feel like there's the spiciness that's there leans to a rye, but you might have to know that. I think maybe the intensity masks it more than anything, and it just smells like a burly whiskey. Might have to dive into the taste to get a little bit further. Man, that drinks high. That drinks high proof for sure. That is a dense, kind of tight, rich whiskey right from the get-go. What I find is interesting about this pour, now this is from a single run of barrels distilled in 2015. So they're probably just close to 10 years old. But this is one of those pours that leans into what I would call like flavor reduced, barrel flavor reduced, super intense, super thick. feel like if I really sat with this more, if I kind of sat through and looked at the room more, I could find other pours that bring this type of thick flavor. But it has an interesting flavor profile where it does have those rich, cooked sugar notes, those deep, fudgy chocolate notes. But then it comes back to this more playful sweetness, like almost bubblegum-like on the front. But then as you sip through it, it moves from like a candied bubblegum, almost like crafty-esque, playful, youthful rye-esque like notes. It's not grainy, but it has this bubblegum-like sweetness on the front of it. And as you sit with it, it morphs again into more strawberries, into reduced cherry cola syrup, like a cherry birch beer like syrup without all the carbonated water. So just thick, laying on the tongue. There's a sugary vanilla play to these otherwise spice notes. So it's almost like a root beer float because it's not overly herbal and biting, even though that is present. It definitely kind of has a counterplay with some sweetness. So there's a lot of back and forth between these big intense notes, these kind of jagged kind of spice notes, and then some creamier, sweeter notes as well. But then underneath that, you also have some really interesting fruits that you can kind of notice the more you sip with it. There's almost a little bit of pear. There's some fig, some date, and some espresso. Again, that's kind of why I don't mean crafty like in a negative connotation. I mean that like if I think about some things like Frey Ranch, if I think about some things like Epic or Epoch Rye, these kind of big, thick flavors that do lean heavy in the dried and dark fruit notes, you get some of that here. It's this really interesting play back and forth with the flavors. I'll say this. If you find this pour close to its retail price at $70, $80 MSRP, at $100, this bottle is an insane value because it's such an intense and flavorful, almost 10-year experience. And I think that you'll be really happy with what you get in that. Now, from the prices that I've seen this hike to on secondary, that's where it's a lot more difficult because I could easily see somebody disappointed in what they get out of this pour compared to what they paid for it. If they're upwards of $400, $500, something like that. I mean, there are very few whiskeys that I think warrant anyone going that high a price. And I think some of you all would say there's no whiskey that's worth going that high of price. So let me bring up a couple of things that this makes me think of that potentially could be different to find. Two of which, if you're leaning more into that kind of interesting, heavier chocolate, that reduced sugar-like note, that molassesy type note, there are actually two rum styles, or two rums that I kind of lean towards. El Dorado being one. So these like Demerara rums have this really interesting cooked, toasty like profile on the nose. They're going to be a little sweeter. Overall, they're rums, right? They're sugary-based spirits, not rye or bourbon. And the other one, even that made me think of it, I don't have the bottle here, but it was the Rolling Fork 16-year rum that they had that went so far in the Ascot Awards. Now, this rum, it's probably one of my favorite spirits all year long. It was second spirit of the year, lost to the Lasso Motel, but it is the best non-whiskey spirit of the year. And this sucker is just chock full of sticky, dense, intense flavors that kind of really cling to the palate. So if you're looking for an experience, like a clinging mouthfeel-like experience, the dark, gripping flavors, a rum like that might be something that you're interested in. However, this also made me think of a couple of ryes that we've had in recently. Again, I don't have full bottles of them, but the most recent one being probably Broad Branch. So Broad Branch, they have the Rye Fidelity. I tried this 6-year one. Going to be a little bit different. There's going to be more custardy, a little bit lighter fruit notes. That's not what I'm thinking about. The 10-year anniversary, also a good product. Again, not quite what I'm thinking about, but they had sent us samples of this Rye Fidelity cask strength that I think is probably out in some markets and will probably be available on Steelbox sometime soon. The cask strength, it's 9 years old, 134 proof. So this is going to be a little bit similar of a profile, but it is going to lean itself a bit more traditional rye. I believe this is 100% rye out of, again, North Carolina, I believe. And anyone who watches this who might have been like at Bruzel Fest or watches Bruzel, I think he talked about this being like his favorite distillery from it. So they've been getting a lot of buzz lately. But I'd gotten in this Rye Fidelity cask strength sample, and it was one of the things that I thought about when I was thinking about Tanyard Hill. It's not as dark though. So it's not going to have that dark, sugary sweetness like the rums that I mentioned, but it does have a big voluptuous play. And then it has a bit more of the softer notes, about the softer fruit notes, and a little bit more custardiness. So not quite the closest example, but for a similar age and kind of kicking up there in proof, someone who wants maybe a lighter, fruitier pour than what the Tanyard's going to give them, then I think that this is going to give that type of profile that the Tanyard doesn't necessarily. Now, moving into something that I think is even closer, but also different in a different way, we have a single barrel coming from Woody Creek Distillers. Again, this is going to be 100% rye. This is also 9 years old. It's 146 proof. So this is actually something I think is pretty pound for pound. Comparable stat-wise. Price might be a bit higher than the retail, but it's going to be findable for a period of time. I don't think there'll necessarily be that many of them. And this is one that I previously had talked about and said that it has notes that remind me of like old Thomas H. Handy. So you're not exactly comparing same like big thick notes again from what you get on the Tanyard Hill, but the palate right away does have some big gripping depth. I think the Tanyard Hill is more fudgy milk chocolate. This is a bit more drier, dark chocolate, but still kind of in the chocolatey camp. I feel like you might notice more wood note from this Woody Creek, where the Tanyard leans more into like rickhouse aromatics and like experience type thing. So if you've spent time in a rickhouse, I think that you're going to find some similarities in the nuance and in the, it gets not only just in the wet woods, the dried woods, the barrels aging, a little bit leathery type notes. That's the Tanyard Hill's profile. The Woody Creek also leans a bit more spice in terms of cinnamon. And so this is going to give you something, especially as it lingers, while it's got some fruitiness to it too. It's going to be a little bit more rye-like than than what you're getting on the Tanyard Hill. Closing some thoughts on the Tanyard Hill. I think that if you liked the Coy Hill, if you're just chasing after some of the allocated releases that Jack Daniel's doing, it's going to be hard for me to dissuade you from chasing these. I do think that there are some things to be found in these substitutes that I gave you, depending on like what exactly you're looking for in a pour. But I also think that there are also similarities in other pours, should you be able to find them easier. I would say I'm actually rolling back a little bit on my own words of what I thought I was going to be reviewing in this, because when I tried through it yesterday before giving it some time, it was a bit more disjointed than I thought it was, and it had a little bit more, I don't know, I think sometimes the Jack Daniel's products, like the Jack Daniel's 14, are really, really great whiskey, but there's still a couple of things that prevent it from being like as cohesive as some other things for me. And I felt that here with this Tanyard Rye. But coming back to it today, I think that it presented itself in a really nice way when you think about boiling it down, this fudgy, oaky fruit cohesion. That's an absolute flavor explosion. And I think that probably sounds pretty good to a whole lot of people. And I think that I'd be really curious to hear other people's opinions on whether the lower proof ones or the higher proof ones have hit better and what direction they lean to. I think that's the biggest downside with doing a review video of a product like this, is that they're single barrels. And so your miles may vary. And as I mentioned in the very, very beginning of the video, that's been a piece of why I haven't been able to plug the Jack Daniel's single barrel strength ryes as much, because the ones I've tried, I've not had super great experiences with them. So Jack Daniel's Rye is a product I have a lot of back and forth with. And so it isn't something I normally would lean towards. but I'm glad I got a chance to try that. I hope maybe some of that was helpful. I don't even know. I don't even know what I said. It felt like it was like a lot of running around, but I think it's a super powerful rye, one that it's actually hard to pinpoint something else that tastes exactly like that. And so for that reason, I think it's super unique. I think it would be really curious to see how it does against other things, because again, it's hard to find something that compares against it. So in a rye category for end of the year consideration, it could stomp on a lot of things. I could see it not performing as well against some of these other things I tried today, and how they nuance. I'll see where to put that. Normally I'd put something like this in the rare and allocated, but I only have like one of them. This is the rye that's in that category. And I don't know how that would do either. I wanted to not like it. I wanted to think that everyone was just kind of hyping it up. And I think, again, as I continue to sit with it, I could pull it apart more, but as I sit with it and it opens up, I don't know, there's a lot of things to like about it as well. Jack Daniel's just continuing to release really, really great whiskeys, and I think it's kind of wild. It's kind of wild that that everyone is talking about Jack Daniel's, but here we are. Guys, if you got a chance to try this pour, I'd love to hear your all's thoughts with it down in the comments below. Thanks again, as always, for tuning in to another video. Hope it was insightful, informational. Let me know what other things you want to hear me talk about as we get close to the end of the year before we start diving into the end of the year wrap-up videos. Thanks again for tuning in, everybody, and until next time, we'll see you all later.